All right, so I feel like we need to address the ads that have been running on Spotify, Apple, etc.
I didn't realize everyone gets different ones. I got a med spa one, and I forget what the other one was, but then I also got Chumba Casino, and I'm like, I don't really know that I'm your target audience, but okay.
I got one for Turkish Airlines, and
Nice.
I know that a listener wrote in and said she got an insanely religious ad, which we want no part of. This is not, we don't want to be tied to any religion one way or another. So
yeah, we apologize.
The reason is we've crossed a threshold that makes us eligible to get paid advertisements. And I know that startup podcasts get these ridiculously random, cheesy ads. So once we continue to grow, the ads will get better and we'll probably be able to be more selective. But right now, we get what we get. So we are so sorry to our listeners. But if there's any consolation, Turkish Airlines is having a hell of a deal right now. The official airline of Turkey.
The official airline of Murder Unscripted.
I like it.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Thursday, and half past
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, Crime Crew? Welcome to episode 65 of Murder Unscripted, the most immersive true crime podcast on the interwebs today. I'm your host, longtime true crime producer Ed Hydock, along with, as always, my right-hand woman, Melissa Spivey.
What's up?
So, before we dig into anything today, we want to let you guys know that we're also dropping at the same time, it should drop along with this video, a supplemental video where, in our efforts to bring you some immersive content, we decided to go to the town where this case actually takes place.
Yeah, so we took off work one day and we drove up to Schuylkill Haven, which is where the case took place. And we got to see where the victim lived. We kind of got to see where he hung out and what was like the cool hangout back in 1985.
Yep.
And we also got pretty close to the area where the crime ultimately kind of happened.
Yeah, we didn't want to trespass.
Yeah, we had to be careful.
I feel personally like it's a true way to get people to understand the places we're talking about, the time period. You can see remnants of the past in this town, especially. It's a very old town.
Well, and it makes the whole case come alive almost. Like it becomes more than just a story you're reading or a story you're hearing because we were physically there. And we actually had pictures from the original crime file. Mm-hmm. And these pictures were kind of like a time capsule because we could see some of the same things now, even though it's 30 years later.
Oh, 85? So 40 years.
40 years later, yeah. So we could see certain things that were still in the pictures, which was kind of cool to see how the area has grown.
Absolutely. And we think it's important for you guys because I don't know anybody else that's doing this. So we thought it would be cool to bring you guys along. But I do encourage you to watch that after you listen to this case because you'll need to understand the story and the places we're talking about for that video to make a lot of sense.
Also, it was like the hottest day of the year.
It was. You almost died. There were a couple of hills that I was worried about.
I made us hike up a hill and you were like, we should probably go get the car. And I was like, we'll be fine.
Halfway up the hill, you're like, you should have got the car.
I'm like, I'm dying. I'm literally dying.
Well, you pulled through for the sake of the show. So yeah. Great job. You made it. Well, all right. Well, we are in week 3 of our block entitled Small Town Secrets, which means it's time for our featured case. And I have to say that of all the cases I have covered in my career, this is my absolute favorite. And one, because it's local. So I was already kind of familiar with this area before I even got the story. 2, I mentioned this the other week. So I was really connected with our victim in this case. He was a boy who faced some of the same challenges that I did growing up, and what happened to him, no one deserves. And 3, I made an incredible set of friends with the investigators who were involved in this case, specifically the cold case detective Rob Betnar, who will be our guest next week, one of the Pennsylvania State Police criminal investigations commanders at the time, as well as David's family members. And David's our victim today. This is one of the few stories that I've had the privilege of covering not once, but twice. Once for an old ID show called Nightmare Next Door, and more recently, season 2 of Cold Case Files. It was the reboot, not the older one. And interestingly, I had originally found this case for Forensic Files. It was my last year there. We were kind of on hiatus, like they weren't sure what was going on with the show. So they were still looking for cases for what would have been season 14. And the show got canceled before we could ever do the case. So that's how far this case dates back.
That's so wild. Like, first of all, who decided to cancel Forensic Files?
Oh, I'll tell you. Yeah.
Second of all, does that happen a lot? Like, where you cover a case for multiple series?
Well, to answer your first question, Court TV rebranded at the time. If you all remember the old Court TV that would just run trials all day long, they became True TV. And I think it was an effort to join the reality. I think they were doing a lot of cops, a lot of that live action stuff.
Mm.
So we all got laid off. But now Court TV's back, so make sense.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. So, and to your other question, it's not often that you get a chance to do that. But when you run into a story where you have willing participants, and the story just happens to fit the criteria for both shows. You know, for example, Nightmare Next Door was about these crimes that happen in small communities. It's one of those, like, you never know your neighbor type shows.
Mm-hmm.
And so that fit the bill, obviously. And then Cold Case Files was, well, this is a cold case. So I pitched it again and we made it work.
Well, it's a really good case. And I think everyone's gonna... I think it's also one that most people probably haven't heard.
I agree. Yeah, it was super random. And I don't know, that doesn't make it my favorite. There's other reasons, but I do like the fact that it's not some well-known case. Like, there's only a couple shows out there, which we did. All the shows we were behind. And then there's a couple other podcasts, which I'm going to get into in just a second.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So before I do, though, is there any housekeeping to attend to?
Just the usual, like, subscribe, follow, Blue Sky.
Blue Sky. I don't even, what do you do on Blue Sky?
I don't really know. It looks like Twitter and Facebook had a baby and had Blue Sky. Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, good. We should figure out how to use that.
Yeah, probably.
Anyway, before we dive in, I want to say this case has popped up, as I just mentioned, on several other podcasts, which simply use the Nightmare Next Door and Cold Case Files episodes we produced as their script. And it's basically all recycled information that proves anyone with a microphone can start a true crime podcast and talk about whatever case they want if they have a television set. But there's one YouTuber in particular that I want to give a special shout out to, and her channel is called Anna Solves. And Anna covered this case about 2 years ago, basically using footage from both of our shows, Cold Case Files and Nightmare Next Door, and a thumbnail splattered with blood, and the title, Teen Who Got Butchered to Death by a Psycho Drug Dealer. And as you're going to learn as we go through this case, David was not butchered, and the perp was not a psycho drug dealer. And I mean, that's subjective, I guess, but you're going to learn that this case is anything except what that clickbait headline suggests. And when David's family saw that one day, they reached out to me and asked what could be done about it. It was heartbreaking to them to see something like that. After you learn about this case, you'll understand why. And I said, unfortunately, nothing, because the internet is this place where people can say or do whatever they want, and usually in the name of just getting clicks or views. Anna, if you're watching, I just want to extend a big on behalf of David's family, because I realize that you have millions of followers. And my advice to you is to be more mindful of the victims when you create your hack videos, because it's irresponsible journalism. And not to mention, you're adding insult to injury to the people who matter. And those people are noticing. So with that out of the way, I'm ready to tell you the real story of David Reed, the version you will not see on TV or hear on any other podcast that uses our shows to make their content.
Usually I'm the one that's super angry, but you know what? I like that you're doing it this week.
I don't usually get like this, but that's when
no,
a
you
family,
don't.
God, when a family reaches out to you and says, this is hurtful to me, I feel like they don't have a voice. So we have this little platform that we have. So I do. So that's the least I can do.
The thing about it is it's so ridiculously wrong. Like there was no butchering. There's no, like you said, psycho drug dealer. Why not just say what really happened? It's still a true crime case.
I know. And I get the idea of, we're learning this as much as anyone, that generating catchy headlines and thumbnails is what attracts people to your content. But there's a fine line, and damn it, make it accurate at least.
Yeah.
Oh man. So let's dive in after that nonsense. So we're going to skip the time machine this week because this is a pretty beefy story. And for those old enough, I want you guys to go back in your mind to 1985, which was a simpler time. I mean, I know me personally, I was spending my Saturday mornings watching cartoons on the couch, probably pro wrestling, I think was on from 9 to 10.
I wasn't even born then, but go on.
I know. Okay, well, buried in the mountains of eastern Pennsylvania's coal country, we call it, it's tiny Schuylkill Haven. And if I were to put you on the map, I would say Haven is about 25 miles northwest of Reading. And we're not terribly far from Reading either. So it was a little bit of a hike for us, maybe an hour and change. Mm-hmm. And it's actually right next to Pottsville, which is home to the factory that makes everybody's favorite lager, Yingling.
They do a great tour, though, guys, and you get as much beer as you want.
You get, at minimum, 2 free full beers when you're done the tour. Highly recommend. So with only 5,000 people that call Schuylkill Haven home, this place epitomizes the phrase rural simplicity. These are hardworking, hard-drinking, everyday folks who enjoy life in their little enclave. In general, Schuylkill Haven is a relatively quiet, it's a safe place, everybody knows their neighbor. A lot of residents work in offices or admin buildings, and many of them still, though, have blue-collar jobs. And although it's not as frequent as you would see in 1985, children do still ride their bikes around town through the shadows of the train cars that used to drive the city's economy. And one of the town's most beloved bike riders is 13-year-old David Reed. The 7th grader fills his summers by delivering the Pottsville Republican newspapers to its loyal readers. And even when he's not on the clock, David can always be seen coasting through town on his beloved 10-speed. He smiles at everybody that passes him, like everybody in town knows David just from seeing him riding his bike. And David lives at 18 Penn Street on the peaceful south side of Schuylkill Haven with his mom, Joan, an older brother, Jim, and an older sister, Virginia, who went by Ginny. And David had 2 more older brothers. One was Ronald, who actually died of what was believed to be a diabetic attack when he was 27 or 28. And Joe Reed, who was married at the time and living out on his own. So he had some older siblings. Unfortunately, David's dad, who was also named Joe, so this would have been Joe Sr., he died in a car accident in 1973 when David was only 17 months old. So I will add that at the time of this case, his mom had a boyfriend, too, who was also living in this house, and they had a child together who was about 10. And we were there, Melissa. I mean, you saw this house. It's tiny, but apparently a full one.
Yeah, I mean, it was a small home, but it was really cute. And you saying all that about his brothers, we keep seeing this over and over. These families that just suffer tragedy after tragedy.
Yeah, nonstop barrage. Well, in these shows, our job is to paint the victim in the best light imaginable. And make no mistake, David, who went by Dave or Davey to his close friends, he was a wonderful kid. But he definitely had a tough upbringing. So David had pretty bad eyesight, and he wore these big, thick Coke bottle glasses. And while he was incredibly bright, he got bullied in school a lot because of this. He was a hair heavy for his age and these big glasses. According to a friend of David's that I read about in the police report, kids would often call him Davy Barrel just because he was a little chunky.
Kids are such assholes. And David was adorable.
He was adorable. He was a typical kid just going through, what kids go through.
Mm-hmm.
So because of things like that, he would often skip school. And from what I was reading, there were very few repercussions at home when he did. Like, there was very little supervision, and David was pretty much allowed to do whatever he wanted.
Do you feel like, though, that was just kind of the time? Like, it was the mid-'80s, which was like the latchkey kid generation?
I do, to a certain extent, but I also think his mom had some lingering issues, unresolved emotions, I guess is the best way to put it, from losing her husband, as well as David's older brother, Ronald. So, I mean, I know she loved David dearly, but she was known to have a few drinks, and she was still kind of coping with everything.
Yeah.
So it's hard to blame her. I mean, that's tough for a family to go through.
Yeah.
And David's sister, Ginny, was quoted in a police report as saying that he was, quote, with the wrong people all the time. And I can't really speak to the character of these people that she's referring to, but that's Ginny's opinion. And I do know that the people he would hang out with were usually older than him. So... She also mentioned that she wasn't sure if David had smoked cigarettes or marijuana, but she would sometimes catch a whiff of cigs. Cigarettes, I mean, your clothes, everything smells. It's hard to hide that if you're smoking. So she kind of assumed he tried pot because everyone around him was doing it, and she thought he tried some cigarettes. But he's a 13-year-old kid in a town where there's not a whole lot to do, especially in 1985. So who cares? It doesn't make him a bad kid by any stretch of the imagination. Personally, I think David was kind of left to his own devices and was just looking for people to connect with.
Yeah, that's tough. He grew up without a dad. He lost his older brother. And then the other older brother was so much older and out of the house. It was like he didn't really have a whole lot of positive male role models to look up to or like to spend time with him, I feel like.
That's absolutely true. And I will say that David had a very close bond with his brother Joe. And one of the things they liked to do together is they would always fix up David's bike. They would trick it out, change out the seats and stuff. This bike was literally David's pride and joy. So they definitely had this special connection. And I know his mom, Joan, and Ginny loved him dearly too. But Ginny was quite a bit older, so there was this age gap, which makes it tough to kind of find commonalities. So David also had some cousins who he was tight with. And one of his cousins, Rhonda, she participated in the Cold Case Files episode, and she brought along this awesome sticker book of David's to show us. And we had her sitting in the chair kind of going through this. And she and David would apparently sit on the front steps and trade stickers. And it was so nostalgic to see this folder because I remember doing the exact same thing. Like, I don't remember everything that was on this folder, but I remember like a Skeletor sticker, He-Man, and I imagine there were some were Scratch and Sniff. Remember those?
Oh, so 1980s.
Exactly. And one of the coolest things about David is he loved airplanes. And I'm not sure where this fascination came from. Like, I don't know if anyone in his family was in the Air Force, maybe a grandfather. I don't know. But he dreamed of one day becoming a pilot. And honestly, the sky was the limit for David. I do believe that he had the potential to do something great with his life if only he could have found his path. And I think he would have done that once he got older. Unfortunately, he never got the chance because in the summer of 1985, as it's winding down, one of David's bike rides tailspins into a tragic nightmare. So it's just before 1 o'clock on Wednesday, August 21st, and David's heading out the door for one of his afternoon bike rides. He grabs his favorite Pottsville Republican t-shirt, waves goodbye to his mom, Joan, and assures him he will be home for supper. But by 7 o'clock, his seat at the table is still empty. And his mom gets the gut feeling that something bad has happened because, I want to be very clear, David, this was unlike him. Although he would spend his days just out and about, kind of on his own, he would always come home. And since David didn't actually say where he was headed, like mom quickly gets on the phone with friends and neighbors to see if they might have spotted him riding around town, but no such luck. So she calls all the hospitals too. He hasn't been admitted. So she's like racking her brain as to where he could be. And eventually she just sends the siblings out to go look for him because they know Schuylkill Haven like the back of their hands. And they stop at all of David's usual hangouts, including the train tracks and something called the bank wall. And the bank wall is exactly what it sounds like. This is an old stone wall, maybe about, 20, 30 feet long at the edge of a bank parking lot. And there's some train tracks that run next to it. It's right in the center of town.
Yeah, the bank wall was actually one of the stops we made when we went to Schuylkill Haven, and it's high enough that you could sit on it. And I could definitely see the local kids like hanging out after school, smoking cigarettes, catching up on the day's gossip.
Totally. Well, unfortunately, there was no sign of David there either, and it's as if he just vanished into thin air. So after hours on the lookout, his siblings returned home empty-handed, and David's mom was distraught beyond belief at this point, obviously. And she quickly contacts the authorities, tells them he's missing, and describes what David was wearing, which was his white Pottsville Republican t-shirt, blue jeans, and blue sneakers. And they hope they'll be on the lookout for him. They hope he's spotted. So Joan says David should also have his wallet on him because she looked around the house when he didn't come home and she's like, okay, his wallet's not here, so it must be on him. And she thinks he had about $2 or $3 in his pocket. Oh, and those giant Coke bottle glasses, I should mention this. He actually lost them a few weeks earlier. And rumor has it he lost them while swimming, possibly down by the dam at Lake Winona. And David was really upset about it. So all the pictures you see that show him in glasses, when he left the house that day, he was not wearing them.
That's concerning because he definitely needed those glasses, and without them, I feel like he would have been in a vulnerable and possibly dangerous situation.
Yeah, even just basic stuff like riding your bike. Let's say nothing bad happens to him. You're just riding your bike. I mean, you need to see. So, yeah, I agree. So, police enlist the help of the local fire department to begin searching for the missing boy. And in a town that's literally no bigger than a postage stamp, finding David should be easy, right? You would think.
Yeah, it is not a big town at all.
No, but guess again, because after searching Schuylkill Haven's nooks and crannies, including the bank wall, and they would look inside these train cars too, because the tracks ran all the way through town and there are cars like sporadic. People would hang out in there. According to police reports, quote, searchers checked from the Cressona Yard and Cressona Crossing to the Iron Bridge at Miller's Pond, end quote. But his family insists he's no runaway. So with no obvious suspects in sight or like no idea what happened to him, they have no clue what could be to blame for his disappearance.
I'm actually shocked that the police even searched, like, on that first night. This is the mid-'80s, prime time for police to say, oh, he's just a runaway, he'll be back, and, not even file a report sometimes, let alone actually start searching. So that, I think, is really incredible.
Yeah, they tried. And there's not, to be fair, there's not a lot going on in Schuylkill Haven. Like, as far as
Right.
I can't attest to it back in the 80s, but I mean, it's a pretty sleepy town. Luckily, the next day, investigators do get their first clue, and it comes from David's mom. So Joan reported that family and friends were out searching as well and found David's beloved bicycle in the weeds next to a set of railroad tracks that ran right through the center of town, right next to that bank wall where all the kids used to hang out. And remember when you and I were there, we were standing right on the wall and I'm pointing down the tracks because you really shouldn't be on there as a pedestrian. Yeah. And it's about 100 yards down the tracks right there in the weeds. And at that point, you can cue the crow because we know now that something bad happened to David.
Oh, that's chilling. Everyone knew he loved that bike. He never would have left it so carelessly also. Like, he wouldn't have just thrown it in the weeds, I'm sure.
Yeah, there is no chance he just abandoned it. So police searched this area looking for anything that might lead them to the missing teen. They checked the bike, but because it was laying out in the open like this for now, at least overnight, because it was the next day, anybody could have handled this. So fingerprints won't do us a lot of good. This could have 100 different sets of fingerprints on it for all we know. So they do spread out and begin a neighborhood canvass. Unfortunately, they get stonewalled because there's nothing near the bike and there's no one around that had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. Everyone they do talk to is just like, oh yeah, David Reed. We see him riding his bike around town. They didn't really know much other than that. So another day passes and there's still no word from David. And we all know just from working these cases just how crucial those first few hours and days are when dealing with missing persons.
Well, yeah, and especially if, he was kidnapped or abducted, whoever took him could literally be states away already. Or if he fell somewhere and got hurt, I mean, every hour that passes could mean the difference between life and death.
Absolutely. But hold that thought because that very same night, August 23rd at 11:54 p.m., police get another tip from a local woman named Kathy Shop. And Kathy was a family friend who used to be tight with David's sister, Ginny, but she's known kind of more, she's just a town, I don't even know what you call it. Someone that, like a barfly, but just in town. A townie. She's a townie. Yeah. She was just hanging out. Everyone knew her. So Kathy calls police to report that while she was out riding her bike 2 days ago, so August 21st, the day David went missing, around 5 o'clock, she had seen David on his bike with two other boys. And according to Kathy, David said that he had a couple dollars in his pocket and he asked if she'd buy him some beer. And Kathy agreed, took his money and popped into D&D bar where she bought him a bottle of Yingling. After that, Kathy and David went on their separate ways. But this is where things start to get super strange. So later that night, sometime between 6 and 7 o'clock, she says she saw a light blue cargo van traveling down Main Street and it was heading east toward the Penn State campus, which is about a mile outside of town. And the driver of the van had dark curly hair and he was wearing sunglasses. Now, here's the strange part, because as this van drove by, she saw David in the passenger seat waving to her.
Wait, how was he waving? Was it a friendly wave or a frantic wave?
Doesn't say, but I imagine it was a friendly wave. I'm going for a ride.
An acknowledgement. Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's what I gathered from it. So this van that she says she saw was light blue. It had a dark blue stripe that ran along the side and on the back doors, and she makes a special point to say the back windows, it had windows, but it didn't have curtains on them. And for you youngsters, vans back then literally had curtains on their little windows that you could close. It was awesome. And because this was such a strange encounter, she had never seen this van around town and hadn't seen it since, it was weird to see David Reed inside too. So she managed to get the license plate. 010035, she gives to detectives. So obviously this is huge, especially when Kathy adds another little tidbit of information. So she says a friend of hers, who I will not name, but she said this friend had talked to David 4 days ago. So this is a Friday now, so this would have been on Monday. And David had asked this friend for directions to the Pennsylvania border. And this friend directed him toward Route 78, which does head toward New Jersey if you take it far enough. And he hadn't seen David since.
Except that we know he was alive and well and still in Pennsylvania on Wednesday. So I feel like that either didn't happen or someone's confused about their days.
There's a lot of speculation about this tip and everything surrounding it, so we'll see this as it goes on. But at this point, this is the biggest lead police have. I mean, that's a huge tip. Unfortunately, when they run this plate that Kathy Shop provided, it doesn't return a hit, so either she was lying or she was completely mistaken about the numbers. But either way, it's a dead end, and police are left with basically nothing. And slowly the days turn to weeks, and the weeks to months. And the seasons begin to change at this point, so now we're in winter, specifically December of 1985. And this part is super sad. So a story about David's case appeared on the news, and his mom, Joan, was in this story, and she's talking about how she got all these Christmas presents for David. She wrapped them, and they were just waiting for him to come home. And it's just such an awful position to be in as a parent, and I'm not entirely sure what I would do, or how I would handle this myself.
I have Christmas presents for David.
That's always so sad, but we do hear that a lot. Like, parents will buy Christmas or birthday gifts for the missing child in hopes that, they'll come home.
Yeah, we just saw it in Tara Sidorovich. She had, she was missing, I think, 8 months, and she had bought presents. So, but it was clear that people were holding on to hope that David would be returning home alive. But on December 15th of that same year, 1985, that hope takes a serious blow. So it's 3:30 p.m., and police get a call from a man named Robert Howard, and he lives at 508 Caldwell Street. And to be clear, Kimberly Svensson, his girlfriend, was the actual owner of this home, but Robert was out walking with Kimberly in the woods behind their house. And apparently they had some problems with some neighborhood cats who were, quote, ripping at their garbage, end quote. So basically they were trying to find these cats and return them to their owners. And Robert says while they didn't find any cats, they did find some human remains, along with a few pieces of tattered clothing.
Oof, that is something I don't want to find when I'm out and about. Like, how creepy would that be?
Oh my God, I know. And that's when you sent me to look at that barrel that was laying on the side of the road, I was like, there's a body in here. Like, I'm intrigued, but I also don't want to find that. So
yeah.
Well, and hold that thought, because in case that discovery wasn't creepy enough, among those remains, which were basically just bones, was a human skull. And Robert brought it home with him.
Oh my God, why would you touch it?
He literally, they call the police. Police show up at the house and he's got a skull sitting on the kitchen table. What?
Wow. Yikes.
Yeah. So police obviously pepper Robert Howard with questions about this discovery. And on TV, we make a humongous deal about, could this have been the person responsible? Like, we really play him up as a suspect. And honestly, this was something police did have to consider, because that is so unusual and just unheard of. For the sake of time, I will tell you that Robert Howard was not involved. He was just some guy who made a discovery. So Robert escorts police officers up into the woods and shows them the remains, which were about 50 yards up this steep embankment behind the place on Caldwell Street. And there he points to this white t-shirt and some blue jeans and a single blue sneaker. So one of the sneakers was missing. And immediately a team of investigators descend on this snow-covered scene.
So you and I found this wooded area when we went up there, and I'm so surprised that anyone found the remains. Like, that is not an easy area to access. It's incredibly steep. It's not somewhere anyone should be or needs to be. So the fact that they found his remains at all, I think, is pretty incredible. I can't imagine trying to get up that hill in the snow. This had to be the hardest crime scene to get to.
Yeah, and it's luck, too. I mean, if he was not looking for these cats, he doesn't make the discovery. God knows how long they'd be laying out there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about these remains. So as I mentioned, they were basically just bones at this point they appeared to be in a shallow grave. There was no flesh left on them, and they were sun-bleached. They had been disturbed by animals because they had little gnaw marks on them, little chew marks, and they were kind of scattered. So it was kind of tough to tell from like an initial glance what injuries this person sustained or if it was caused by animals. However, given that the articles of clothing found at the scene match what David Reed was last seen wearing, they're pretty sure it's him at this point, especially when they see that white t-shirt because there's a Pottsville Republican logo on it. Aww. So police spend the rest of the afternoon carefully collecting these bones and any other potential evidence that they find. And there were two main sections where the bulk of the bones were found. They were about 24 feet apart from each other, and most of them were partially frozen. So picture anything you pick up in the snow, you let it sit out all winter and you go to get it, and there's leaves stuck to it, there's dirt, it's frozen solid. So that's kind of what they're dealing with. And meanwhile, some other investigators have kind of spread out, and they're speaking with all the neighbors at the bottom of this hill where this discovery was made.
And just to clarify for the listeners, when we were out there, and this is a pretty desolate road, like there are only about 4 or 5 houses at the base of this hill, and they kind of come out of nowhere.
It's true. It's this little tiny strip of houses in a super secluded road. And we'll pull up an aerial view so you guys can see what we're dealing with, at least back in 85, to get a sense of the area. But police are talking to all of these neighbors, and they speak with a man named Joe Geiger. And he lives in one of these houses kind of on the end of the strip. If you watch the other video we did, Joe Geiger's house actually, I think it burnt down, and I forget what year, but his house isn't actually there anymore. And they tell him some bones were found up in the woods, and they ask if he has any additional information. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? And Joe says, actually, yeah. He's like, now that I see what's going on up there, I have these 2 big mean dogs, and I keep them tied up outside on a rope, and they always chew through the rope, and they disappear in the woods, and they actually were bringing some of these bones back to his place. And these dogs just kind of take them. You know how dogs grab a bone and squirrel away somewhere? So they would go down in his basement, this dingy old basement, and it was kind of down by where his coal stove is. And Joe didn't think much of it at the time. He assumed they were just animal bones. But now that police have identified them as human, and like he can see what's going on the hill, Joe's like, let me go get these for you. He goes to get them, and one of them was a jawbone. And he hands them over to police. And he said he'd been keeping them in that little coal bucket. Like it could have looked like an animal. He's maybe a deer or something. I don't know why. I don't know. He just didn't think they were human.
Oh my God.
And by now, the news is all over this, and they actually speak with Joe about the incident. And here's a short clip from that interview.
David Reed of Schuylkill Haven disappeared in the summer of 1985.
They came back to the house and they were chewing on bones, and at the time, I didn't think nothing of it.
So his interview kind of reminds me of the Ian Huntley interview when we did the Sullivan murders a couple months ago.
Yep.
He is just kind of having a regular conversation, doesn't seem anxious, doesn't seem stressed, just like he's shooting the shit with the interviewer.
Totally. So these remains are sent to Pottsville Hospital, but obviously there's no way like a regular autopsy could be performed on them. And I will say that they did confirm it was David around this time because they had dental records. So they made that comparison fairly quickly. Dr. Richard Bindi took a look and he made several determinations. And the first was he noticed this little tiny hole in David's sternum, which could be consistent with a bullet wound. So he's like, oh my God, this kid was shot. However, this hole was smooth, though. There were no signs of beveling, which happens when a bullet goes through the bone. So not to mention, there were also no traces of lead around the hole. So he basically determined that David had this condition called sternal formana. But it's basically an anatomical abnormality where a person's sternum has a tiny hole in it. Like this is a thing. Now, other than that, he really wasn't able to make any determinations about how David died. There were no other clear signs of injury on the bones. But he throws out this like interesting idea that no one had ever considered as citing a medical study that was called Sudden and Unexpected Deaths After the Acute Onset of Diabetes Mellitus. By all accounts, David was a healthy young man. However, Bindi wonders if he had undiagnosed juvenile diabetes, which, as I can attest to, like it can lead to sudden drop in blood sugar. And when that happens, you get messed up. Like you get disoriented, you get lethargic, you get real antsy, and it can even cause a person to go comatose. So the thought is that this is maybe what happened to David up there. And remember I told you that Kathy Shaw said she bought him a Yingling that night. So this condition can actually be worsened if alcohol is involved.
So wait, their theory was that like he was walking around up in the woods for some unknown reason and basically had a diabetic episode. And I mean, obviously he couldn't call for help and then he just died there alone. Like, is that what they're thinking?
That was the theory. I mean, there was no other proof that anything else happened. So you got to throw everything out at this point.
Well, and it also doesn't sound like he was necessarily buried.
No, it was like a very shallow grave. It was like a half-ass attempt to bury.
Okay.
So maybe it was like, it could have, the seasons change. It's hard to say how, can't really attest to how deep this grave was, if it really was a grave at all. Police wonder if some dedicated experts can kind of take a look at this. They might have expertise that the local medical examiner doesn't. So on January 21st, we're about a month after these bones were discovered, they're shipped off to the University of Pennsylvania, where Dr. Alan Mann and Janet Monge examined them. And if you all checked out last week's MU Mini, you'll be familiar with Janet Monge and her work. So Man and Monge give these bones a look, and Monge spots a tiny fracture above David's right eye. But the problem is this could have been an old injury. Like, David was so young. So this could have been something he suffered as a child. And she also noticed several breaks in the back of the boy's skull. And she's certain they were unfused bones. Like, bones take a while to come together. So there was no proof that there was anything other than that. So again, it's hard to tell if any of these little injuries were from an attack of some kind or if they were completely unrelated. So Melissa, I ask you, based on what you know about the case so far, what do you think happened to David Reed?
I don't like the theory about the diabetic episode only because why would he have been in that forest by himself? Again, because I've been there and could see the area, that is not somewhere you could easily get to. So, why would he have been there? So I don't know that I buy that. But it's also hard to... he also could have been suffocated.
Right. That's the problem, though. There was no proof of anything.
Right.
So, and the only thing I can say about your theory is that the train tracks that were down the hill from those houses on Caldwell Street, that was a known hangout. So this isn't terribly far from that, but it is up a gigantic hill. So unless you had a reason to be up there, why would David be up there?
Yeah.
So because of all those things that I just mentioned, the cause of David's death was listed as undetermined, which we know is never a good sign because this can seriously hinder the legal process should evidence surface later on that points to this being a homicide. But pin it for a minute because we'll be getting back to this later in the story. So despite this official ruling, police do continue investigating the case because it's clearly strange. And the first thing they do is revisit that theory presented by Kathy's shop that David was getting into a light blue van. And remember I said that Kathy could have been mistaken about the license plate number, or maybe she was lying. Police wanted to find out more about her, and it turns out Kathy has quite the reputation around town. So several locals gave similar responses when they were asked if they know her and what they can tell us about her. And I will spare you the colorful euphemisms that I read in the police report. We'll just call her promiscuous. I was blown away to see some of the things that people called her, but she had a reputation. Not only that, police had a nickname for her of her own, Mrs. Ginsu. And this is because she once stabbed an ex with a Ginsu knife. Do you remember those from the 80s, the Ginsu 2000? So she had people called her Mrs. Ginsu.
Love it.
Yes. Regardless, Kathy had clearly made an impression on Schuylkill Haven.
I don't care who she sleeps with. We don't slut shame here. But I kind of feel like her stories were made up. Especially the license plate. I don't know. I just get a bad vibe about her stories.
Again, there was just a lot of mystery surrounding this whole van theory, but it comes up later in the story, so maybe there's some truth to it. So let's dig into this. So Kathy had been telling people that she knows what happened to David, but she wasn't exactly saying what, because I think it was a lot of hearsay. And it came up that he was maybe at a party on Caldwell Street around the time he went missing. And then there's this van sighting. So police kind of round her up for an interview, and she sticks to her story. She's like, I saw Dave that day, bought him some beer, watched him drive away in a blue van. That's that's all I know. And unfortunately, with no evidence proving otherwise, there's nothing much police can do.
Yeah, but the van story is oddly specific. If she's making all of that up, it's weird to come up with the details about the curtains and the pinstripe and
I
the
agree.
driver with curly hair and glasses. I don't know.
And you got to wonder, at least I'm sure police did, was there truth to this?
Right.
So personally, I think Kathy was a blowhard. And so, see what I did there? Not on purpose. So she liked to insert herself into investigations. And she was a known drug user. And my personal opinion is that she knew what happened to David. I don't think she was involved, but because she ran in the same circle as all the people you're going to meet later, I think there's a chance that this van story was meant to maybe throw police off the trail. I don't know. Maybe she really saw this. But we want to move on to our next viable suspect, and his name is Andy Basaninsky, and he has not been named in any other podcasts, or at least on any other shows, because we changed his name because he was still alive, but now that he's dead, I've gotten the okay to talk about him. So this guy was known as Bass. Andy Basaninsky had the nickname Bass.
Which, you realize my bad guy last week, his last name was Bass.
Crazy, right? This was
2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Unplanned, yeah. Well, Bass was a hard-nosed, blue-collar guy who did have ties to the Reed family. He'd actually dated David's sister, Ginny, for a short time, but he was married at the time. So apparently he played the old, I'm going to leave her, baby, don't worry card until Ginny got tired of his games and decided to break things off. And she said in the police report, quote, I didn't want to be a third wheel, end quote.
Good for her.
Absolutely. So, and I guess the thought would have been that this guy with this bad reputation around town, into drugs, like maybe he was angry at Ginny for breaking up with him, and hurting David was a way to get back at her. So police explore this notion and they catch up with Bass at a construction site where he was working as a laborer. And that's what I believe happened. I can't remember if that's where they actually caught up with him or if that's what we made up in our TV shows just to give him something to do. But he completely stonewalls them. Like, he has no interest in discussing David Reed or anyone else, and he basically tells police to kick rocks. Now, I just mentioned earlier that Bass is a known drug dealer at the time, or at least he was in the drug circle. And I assume he just didn't want police sniffing around, and that's why he was so uncooperative.
And I think that's a big leap from a breakup to murdering her sibling. Like, that seems like a far stretch.
Absolutely. And again, this was just one of the names that popped up as like somebody police might want to speak with. It wasn't saying like, we heard he did it. It was more about just, let's clear this guy. But the funny story about Bass is when we did recreate the scene for Nightmare Next Door, we had him at this construction yard, and when police came to interview him, and we would direct our own recreations as producers when on that show, and I would always put myself in these recrees, like very M. Night Shyamalan, and I want to put on screen for our YouTube audience at least a picture of me carrying this board. I had a hard hat and a little orange vest, and I was walking through the scene. I was what's known as a crosser, and crossers we use all the time to basically take an uneventful scene, like a boring scene where someone's just talking, and it adds action. It brings it to life.
You look like one of the Village People.
I felt like one of the Village People. Anyway, well, regarding Bass, what can police do? You know, there's no proof that anything happened other than we have a missing boy found dead in the woods with no apparent injuries. And at this point, the leads are completely running dry. So sadly, David's case went cold. And for the next decade, there were far-fetched rumors that continued to swirl around Schuylkill Haven. Some people think that David joined a cult, or that he became a carny and got involved in a traveling circus. Others wondered if this was the work of a train hopper, like somebody who rode in on the rails into town and then committed a crime and then left before anybody even knew he was gone.
Yeah.
None of these theories, though, carry much weight, and another 5 years pass with no answers. And it takes quite a toll on David's remaining family. I know his mother, Joan, who I'd mentioned struggled with alcohol her whole life, she passed away in 2000, so 15 years after David went missing without ever knowing what happened to him. And David's sister, Ginny, had her own struggles with drugs and alcohol. I get it. You know, you're coping with this incredible... I cannot even begin to put myself in this situation. Like, losing a loved one is hard enough. Losing a loved one because of a heart attack or because of a car accident is hard enough. But to know that they were likely murdered and then to be now 15 years in and still have no answers, I just can't even fathom that.
No, that you can understand why she would have, leaned into drugs and alcohol. You want to escape.
Absolutely. And despite her demons, though, Ginny relentlessly urged police to take another look at the case. She called them monthly, pressing these investigators, which is what we encourage everybody to do if you're in this situation. And in 2005, her prayers are answered when a savior emerges from the ranks of the Pennsylvania State Police. Our boy, Corporal Robert Bednar.
Whoop, whoop.
So after 6 years on the force, Bednar has finally fulfilled a lifelong dream of breaking into the homicide unit. This guy loves solving puzzles. He's awesome. But as a rookie at the time who was eager to make a name for himself, Bednar fearlessly walks into his boss's office and says, you have any cases I can look into, right? So without hesitation, they reach for the David Reed case. It's one of Schuylkill Haven's oldest and most troubling, and one that's always weighed on the department's mind. And at Ginny Reed's behest, Bednar dusts off the cobwebs and does everything in his power to breathe new life into this stagnant case and maybe get closure for this family. Bednar was just a boy himself when David's remains were found in 1985, and he didn't know David personally, obviously, but he grew up a few towns over from where this happened, so he was familiar with the case. And he's incredibly excited by the prospect of solving it, so he starts digging into the case file. He spreads it all over his living room floor and just absorbs. He spends the next several weeks just reading and taking in all the old reports, all the old information to get a handle on what might have happened to David. Now, like his predecessors, though, he's left with more questions than answers. He can see that his colleagues at the time had turned over every rock available in 1985 with no luck. So Bednar begins his investigation by calling Ginny Reed, David's sister, to tell her that he wants to put out a news story that lets folks know that this has been reignited. And she was going to be the face of the investigation. And here's another little clip of at the time, you could see how much this still bothered Ginny.
Virginia Meadows, flanked by a state trooper and a county detective, looks over some of the evidence into the 20-year-old death of her teen brother.
I think he was murdered. Tell you the truth, I do. And I know somebody knows something, and they're just saying it.
Oh, yeah, you can tell that was, like, hard for her, but she's also glad she's doing it.
Absolutely. Well, once this story airs, Bettner gets to work re-interviewing every single one of the suspects that were interviewed back in the original investigation. And it would take a week to tell you all about these individual interviews, so I'm just going to skip to the ones that kind of carry some weight and tie into the story that I've already told you. So let's start with good old Andy Bassininski. On March 15th, 2005, Bettner interviews Bass in Pottsville City, which is where I assume Bass was living at the time. And this tough guy had softened quite a bit over the past 2 decades. He's now older and immediately apologizes to Bettner for the way he acted toward police back in 85. He says, quote, "I was caught off guard. That was so long ago," end quote. And Bass admits that he was into some pretty unsavory things back then, but those days are over and he's ready to cooperate with investigators however he can.
I think that kind of happens a lot, too, because people get older and they either become less scared of maybe what they were afraid of and why they didn't talk, or they have children of their own and are like, oh my God, I can't imagine if this happened to my child. I would want someone to say something.
Think about how much just you've changed or I've changed. I mean, people change so much in 20 years. I mean, you're a completely different person most times.
Mm-hmm.
So Bass recounts his story about dating Ginny and knowing David, but he says he has nothing to do with the death or disappearance. However, he knows someone who might have. And I talked to Rob about this because I wanted to name him, but we do believe that he's still alive. So we're just going to call him Fred. So according to Bass, Fred was this goofball that used to run with a bartender who worked at Sandy's Bar in nearby Minersville. But it's not Fred's goofball status that worries police. Bass said he used to live on a farm up in Branchdale with his bartender, and he had a penchant for animals, we'll just say.
That's gross.
Yes, but also a penchant for young children.
Also gross.
Well, Bass tells police that he actually believes Fred had been arrested for molesting children, and he would babysit them as a way to lure them. And then he would get them drunk and high. He did this with his own kids too. I mean, at least this is according to Bass. So this is from the report, but it is word of mouth. So, and I sifted through records and found an incident that occurred between October of 84 and March 1986 that led to Fred being charged with 2 counts of rape, 2 counts of statutory rape, 2 counts of involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, and indecent assault. And I know he did some jail time back in the 80s, but it was tough to tell exactly how much. I want to say it was around 17 years.
So he's clearly a scumbag. I mean, if you're going to do that to your own child, I could absolutely see you killing another kid.
Yeah, well, hold on to your butts because get ready for this. So back in the day, Fred drove a light blue van.
Oh.
So now, remember we talked about maybe Kathy Shop's tip was true about this blue van after all these years. And maybe it was Fred's light blue van that was driving David around. So the story is about to get crazier because before Rob Bettner can pounce on this new prime suspect, something unbelievable happens. Fred walks into the police department on his own.
That was not on my bingo card.
Right? So Bettner assumed that he was there to talk about David's case. Why, I don't know. I'm guessing because of that story that came out, things have been rejuvenated. Maybe he heard it was reopened and wanted to clear his name or something. But the real reason is that Fred had just moved to Schuylkill Haven. And if anybody's familiar with Megan's Law, you are required when you move or change addresses to update your address on file. So, but that's freaking wild, right?
That's so crazy. What a coincidence.
Total coincidence. So Bettner uses this incredible coincidence to question Fred about David's case, and he agrees. And Rob told me, this is why we're treading lightly, because Rob told me, quote, he wasn't nervous, he appeared to be honest and forthcoming, and I brought up his past, and it was painful for him. It bothered him. And
good.
Quote. Yes.
It should bother him.
Again, though, we talked about people changing, So the reason we're changing his name is because these guys, these Megan's Law offenders, as monstrous as they are, and they are sick in the head, The things that they did will live with them forever, and people will harass them to this day. We're just keeping his name out of it. Just, it doesn't matter. It's for the sake of the story. So Fred says he does remember David, but he had nothing to do with his death, and he can prove it because he claims he was in a federal prison on those pesky rape charges beginning in 1984, which was a year before David even went missing. And a check of prison records reveals that he was telling the truth, which was a crushing blow to this long stagnant investigation.
Well, prison is a pretty good alibi. I'll give him that.
Yes, hard to dispute that one.
But it does kind of make you wonder if the original theory was maybe right after all. Like, did David just die out there from diabetic shock or something? Or did he fall and hurt himself and he couldn't get up?
Yeah.
I just still can't get over why he would have been there.
Bettner had the same questions, you know? I mean, this is a strange part of the case that I will answer in a few seconds here. And now you're going to understand why this case is the featured case in our Small Town Secrets block. So get ready to have your mind blown. So in a town like Schuylkill Haven, folks don't necessarily go out looking for trouble, but the gossip mill has been churning ever since David Reed's case was reopened 7 months ago. And now that police are back on the hunt, police are finally ready to put the rumors to rest. Someone in particular has been pretty loose-lipped about David's death over the years. Joe Geiger, the man who turned over those bones in 1985.
The one in the interview.
The one in the interview. So apparently Joe thinks David was responsible for stealing some pot plants that he had planted up in those very woods. You wonder why, how David ended up there? Like, that was a place that Joe admittedly used to plant marijuana. One witness recalled Joe saying that if you want to murder somebody, Schuylkill Haven is the place to do it because you can get away with anything. And another witness was hanging with Joe at a party sometime between the time that David went missing and the time his bones were found. And this party was at a neighbor's house on Caldwell Street, so another house in that small row of homes. And remember, Kathy was mentioning a party, so maybe that's where the kind of whisper down the lane started about a party. Well, according to this witness, quote, Joe Geiger was sitting on the railroad tracks crying. He was a nervous wreck saying, I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't mean to hurt him, end quote. And he left it at that, and no one knew what the hell he was talking about, but it was like he was having a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, that I feel like we hear that a lot too, where they either get drunk or something, like at a party, and start talking. I guess the guilt starts eating at them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously this is somebody that Rob wants to talk to. So in July of 2005, Bettner re-interviews the witness that recalled Joe Geiger having this breakdown. And he adds that he was hanging with Joe one day by the bank wall. And this was before David vanished. And David rode by on his bike, as he would always do. And this witness recalled Joe pointing at David saying, quote, I hate that kid. He's messing with my pot plants. I'm going to get him.
That sounds like a threat.
Sure does. So Bettner can sense he's closing in now. Like, this is crucial information that's all coming together. And a quick search reveals that Joe Geiger, who was only 20 years old in that news clip, he's now 40 and he still lives in town. He's got a wife and a young son. So on June 26, 2005, Bettner contacts Geiger, who's obviously blown away to hear from police after all these years. But he keeps this conversation short. He's trying to, just get to know him, maybe get him to let his guard down a little bit. And he tells Bettner, quote, I only saw David Reed a couple times, riding his bike, etc. Supposedly he was in a van. That's what Geiger's saying. I don't remember much. Geiger then says he'd be happy to come down to the station and answer any questions, but he's a little busy right now, so can we do it in a day or two? I'll be down. And Rob says, sure, you know what? But then a couple hours later, Geiger calls him back, and he is a blubbering mess. And he starts spouting off about the bones that were behind his yard, the dogs getting loose, the stench. He's just kind of beating around the bush. Mm-hmm. He said he's assumed it was a dead animal back there, and that's what the smell was coming from. But he also mentions that the incident had been haunting him all these years, and he'd like to come in as soon as possible just to clear things up.
So does that mean he's admitting to this?
No, not yet.
Okay.
3 days later, though, on June 29th, Geiger shows up at the Pennsylvania State Police Schuylkill Haven barracks to speak with Bettner and another detective named Tony Carroll. And this conversation kind of goes round and around and around. And Geiger's offering, he's dropping little breadcrumbs as the interview goes on. He's talking about his dogs again, and he only knew David a short time because he'd hang out with his older siblings, yada, yada, yada. So long story short, Bettner knows that Joe is hiding something. And he basically confronts him with all of these inconsistent statements he's made, the ones from 1985, the ones on the recent phone call, as well as all of the witnesses in Schuylkill Haven that are now pointing the finger directly at him. And that's when Joe cracks and admits that he knows exactly what happened to David, but He didn't do it, but he knows who did.
Mm.
So Joe says he was actually with David and another friend named John Fry on the day that David went missing. And the pair had bumped into David while he was riding his bike and asked if he wanted to get high in a caboose down at the rail yard. And these are the tracks that are right down by his house. And David agreed, and the three went inside the car to hang out. And a short time later, Joe says he saw David and John Fry step outside of the train car for a chat. And he was like looking out the door or the window, and he believed that Fry was confronting David about the missing pot plants that Joe had planted in the woods, and an argument ensued.
All right, but that makes no sense. Like, why would John Fry give a shit about Joe's pot plants? Like, they're not his.
No, they're not. But you know what? Bettner asked him that same question. He's like, he secretly believed that Fry was the one stealing his pot plants, and that he was trying to pin it on David in front of Joe so that he wouldn't look guilty. If that makes sense.
Okay. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this argument is happening, and Joe says he saw Fry take a swing at David, punching him once in the face. And David fell backward, and this is taken from his statement. So, quote, he fell approximately 3 to 4 feet and struck the back of his head on an angle iron near the wheel well.
What's an angle iron?
So that's really like a generic term, like any piece of metal that's bent at a knife. So it's basically just picture a metal part of the train, and he smacked his head on it when he fell backward.
Mm.
So it's not a specific part. It's just a way to describe an angled piece of metal.
Got it.
So instead of narrating what happens next, I'm just going to let Geiger tell you in his own words by reading from the police report. So Joe says, quote, the kid wasn't moving. We panicked and took off. We went to town. I don't remember talking to anyone. And Geiger was asked if they felt remorse for what happened. And Geiger stated that he began to cry immediately after the victim fell and was motionless. Quote, I was just thinking, what the hell did I get myself into? And Geiger stated that they left the body in the caboose and returned to town. Like it sounds like they were just trying to rough him up, and they thought he was unkind. They knocked him out. Mm-hmm. And he says they went to Brokesells, which I guess is a local convenience store, to get something to drink. And he says they got an iced tea, and we thought he was knocked out. I don't think he killed him. We went back and the kid wasn't moving. I didn't do it, but I was there. I don't want to go to jail for being there. End quote.
I find it hard to believe that he was remorseful at all, especially because he had the bones in his basement and was letting his dogs chew on them.
I know. That was something that he couldn't really, he kept trying to say it was just the dogs. I didn't know. So his statement continues. Geiger stated that when he first saw that the victim was there, Fry stated, quote, holy he's there. And Geiger stated that Fry began to panic. Quote, we all panicked. So Geiger related that he and Fry decided to conceal the body, and they decided on the wooded area because it was by like behind Joe's house, up where he knew his plants were. And that was where Robert Howard was living with his girlfriend, Kimberly, at the time. Like the cat people.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, quote, we knew that the cats would conceal the smell. There were always dead things up there, end quote. So after this, Geiger's asked how they moved the body. And he says, quote, we dragged him. John Fry held him by the shirt and I carried his feet, end quote.
Oh, this is so frustrating because I feel like had they called for help after they knocked him out, David could still be alive.
Right? That's the most infuriating part of the story because not only that, but they wouldn't have been in that much trouble, I feel like. Like, instead, they caused the family 4 months of worry about where David was and another 20 trying to prove what happened. So it's just absolutely inexcusable. And while Geiger's story does provide some answers, it leaves a whole lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing, like, was John Fry actually responsible for this, or was it Joe?
Well, and I feel like there's another question, like, how did he die? Did the fall kill him? Was he buried alive? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, how did he actually die?
Hold your horses, my friend, because we're going to get there. So obviously the next step is for Bettner to contact John Fry. And I guess he wasn't living in the area anymore, so there was a phone call. And when presented with this damning statement that Geiger made, Fry says, you're out of your mind. He's like, he admits he was with Joe and David that day, but Joe was the one who punched him. So now we have a he said situation, which is a problem for police because they know one of their suspects is not being truthful. And now Bettner has to decide which is which. So he takes a drastic measure. He wants to dig up David.
Oh, that's just like with our case last week.
That's what I was referencing when I made that comment last week. Yeah. So remember that back in 1985, when David's remains were discovered, they were looked at by the county medical examiner as well as Alan Mann and Janet Monge at the University of Penn. and the case was ruled undetermined. And as I mentioned earlier, that could present a host of legal problems, and here they are. Now they're coming to light. So since this case has never been officially ruled a homicide, police can't charge anyone with a homicide. So Bettner picks up the phone and he rings the Reeds. And there's a heartbreaking story that kind of goes along with this that I'll let Rob tell you next week, but because we're running long, I'll skip to the gist of it. So it's an incredibly emotional decision, but the family says, yes, they signed the exhumation order. So in January of 2008, now we're about 23 years after David's remains were found, Bettner contacts Assistant District Attorney A.J. Serena to organize this dig. And if he can prove that David was murdered, it'll allow him to go after one or both of the suspects. So on January 24th, David's remains are unearthed from the Schuylkill Memorial Park Cemetery. So they pick up David, they pull him out, and I didn't mention this before, but because remember David's bones, he's not a child that you have to put in a coffin. He was reduced to bones. So this coffin is the size of like you would see a baby in if a baby died. So it's this white coffin with angel wings on it, but it's heartbreaking to see a 13-year-old boy in a coffin that's the size of you could put a puppy in, you know what I mean? It's very tiny. So Bettner is like, I need the best of the best to look at these. So what he does is he hops a flight to Gainesville with David's tiny little coffin on board to have them examined by a world-renowned anthropologist at the University of Florida named Anthony Falsetti. And there's another absolutely incredible story that goes along with this. But again, we're running super long, so I'll let Rob tell you because he was there when it happened and it will completely restore your faith in humanity. I promise.
I don't know about that. Humanity's pretty awful. But
Well, January 25th, Falsetti takes a look at David's bones, specifically his skull. And remember, there was a small crack in the back of his head and another by his right eye. And it was believed to have been unfused adolescent bones at the time because David was so young. But now examiners are armed with a story. And a lot of times when these examiners are working, it helps them to have the police report to go with it because now they have context clues. So we have this story now that David was punched in the face by someone. And with that in mind, Falsetti takes a look at these injuries and determines that they are consistent with blunt force trauma. And I'll spare you the scientific vernacular since I'm no doctor, in case you weren't aware. But like me trying to pronounce the names of these bones is like you trying to pronounce British town names. To put it that way.
My goodness. Shire, Shear, Worcestershire, Shear.
Well, so in the second autopsy is complete, Bettner returns to Pennsylvania with the remains, and he gets a second opinion from Janet Monge, again, the anthropologist who examined them back in 1985. So she takes another look and agrees with Falsetti's findings, admitting that her initial assessment was off. However, that's not to blame her for anything. Like, these injuries could have been interpreted many different ways. Back then, there was no clear-cut cause of death, so now that Monge is armed with this Joe Geiger story about a punch and fall, and that the injuries to David seem to match up with that. And Janet participated in the Cold Case Files episode, and she admitted that this was an incredible teaching moment.
No, that's wild, because I feel like it's not often that someone gets to examine a body and then 20 years later examine it again, or bones. But
I asked her that exact same question. I was like, she was in the chair and I said, it had to be a unique experience. And she agreed. She's like, this does not happen often. So, but more importantly, Bettner has now multiple experts agreeing that David's death was no accident. And he successfully had the cause of death changed from undetermined to homicide. So now he's ready to go after Geiger and Fry hardcore. And the problem is, though, he still has to figure out which one dealt the fatal blow, right? That's still a big issue. Did John Fry punch David in the face, or was it Joe Geiger? So it would take a super interesting observation to determine who made that fatal blow. So detectives took note when Joe Geiger was in for his interview. He was filling out some paperwork, and they noticed that he was left-handed. So they knew Fry was right-handed. So this got them thinking, since David's wound was on his right eye, like, it would most likely be a southpaw that, you know what I mean? Like, your dominant hand. So obviously it's not earth-shattering science, but it's like one more sliver of suspicion against Joe Geiger. And when they presented him with this evidence against him, Geiger finally admits that John Fry didn't knock David out. He did.
Wow.
So remember I said on previous episodes that detectives will sometimes wait to make arrests on the anniversaries of a victim's death. Well, this is one of those cases, the one that it was in my mind when I was saying that, because it was super important to Rob. So on August 21st, 2008, now we're at the 23rd anniversary of David's death, Joe Geiger is arrested without incident. And he's charged with third-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. But February of 2009, prosecutors strike a deal with Joe, and you are going to hate this. 2 years he gets in jail for involuntary manslaughter.
Oh.
And before you freak out, keep in mind that he had to be sentenced under the 1985 guidelines. So this was actually a longer sentence for involuntary manslaughter at the time, and I know it infuriated his family and stuff. It makes you angry to hear that someone took another person's life and got 2 years in prison, but I also see the clerical side of it. I guess. I don't know.
I mean, it's shitty. It's unfair.
It is unfair.
Completely unfair. I mean, I always hope that his guilt will harm him, will hurt him more than prison ever could.
Yeah, and I can tell you that Joe became a complete recluse, like, over the years. I think he did have remorse. And if he didn't have remorse, I think it ate at him, which
Good.
It is all you can ask for, because it sucks that he waited all this time to come forward, because I really do think that it would have just saved everybody so much heartache, and maybe he would have turned out differently too. Like, he would have done his time, and I don't know. But here's my take on the thing, and I'm going to harken back to my earlier comments, because now you know David was not brutally slaughtered, and Joe Geiger is not a psycho drug dealer. I do believe his story that he was an older guy. He was 20, David was 13. So first of all, he was the town bully. Like, he could beat up these younger kids. He could pressure them into doing things. He could manipulate them. So I do think that he was just being a tough guy trying to rough David up for taking his plants, which whether David did or not, I have no idea. Like, we'll never know. But that being said, what he did after the fact is inexcusable. Like, he had every opportunity to save this boy's life, and instead he let him die. And even after that, he could have went to cops and said, you know what? I screwed up. I punched this kid and something bad happened. But he took the coward's way out and hoped it would just all go away, causing all of this pain and turmoil to David's family. So whether this was an accident or not, 2 years is not nearly enough time for taking someone's life the way he did.
I hope every time he looks at his son, he sees David and has to think about what he did.
Yeah, I'm not sure his family status now. I just know that he became he just locked himself up, and nobody ever heard from him over the years.
No loss.
Anyway, that is the absolutely insane story of David Reed, and possibly my favorite story in my entire career to tell, because of how invested I became in it for so many years. And not to mention, I was bullied hardcore at age 13, just like David was. So I felt so bad for him. Like, I had a mother with issues, and it decimated our relationship. And I'm also diabetic. So when that theory was in play, I could picture myself having a diabetic episode and just, like, completely dying out there alone. And I just really connected with this boy. And it was an absolute privilege now to be able to tell this story for the third time in a row. And I want to give some special shout outs to Pam Chappelle, Rhonda Fino. They were cousins of David. His brother Joe Reed, who put all of his nerves aside to participate in the Nightmare Next Door episode because he didn't want to do it. I had to talk him into doing it, but it was his chance to talk about how great and wonderful David was. Janet Monge, because she's awesome. A guy named Tom McDaniel, who was a commander with the Pennsylvania State Police, and he helped facilitate a lot of things. Like, this case would not have been solved without him. And Tom actually reached out to me when I was in the hospital. Like, that's how, like, I just got a text from him. And finally, to my friend, Rob Betnar, for, first of all, solving this case and always being available to help kind of guide me through this incredibly complex story. You are the best, man, and I am so thankful for you and for the work you did to bring justice to David.
And we will get to introduce Rob to everyone next week, which I'm excited about. Rob is a really great guy. He's very down to earth, and I think that it's going to be a really good conversation.
I completely agree. And he's excited to be on, and he's kind of asking me what to expect. And I said, stop asking me. Just do it.
Just do it.
Stop. It's just going to be a nice, candid conversation. He's got some cool stories that I didn't mention because I wanted to let him tell them, because this case was personal to him too. He made a promise to Ginny Reed to know that, did I mention that she passed away?
No, you didn't.
Okay. Well, I should tell you that then Ginny also passed away at some point, and she never got to see justice for David. And that was another big part of this, and it sucks. But he'll tell you the story that went along with that. She was actually found by her son when he went to approach them about a kind of a benchmark in the case. he found out about her death. So it hit him kind of hard as well, because he made a promise to her that he would solve it, and he did. He came through.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I know it's your favorite, for lack of a better word. So
yeah, that's not the word. It's just
I get it.
I've been attached to it for so long now. It's the last little thread of Forensic Files too, because that's when I originally found it. So it's like it was one of the last things I did before getting laid off.
Wow. Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad you shared it with us. It's such a wild story, and it's so sad because the death was so preventable.
It was.
Just a simple, I screwed up. We need to get this kid to the hospital. Could have
Yes.
stopped everything.
He
But
may not have been in trouble at all.
right.
You know what I mean? It was a fight.
I still want to know, though, what actually killed him. Did the fall and hitting his head kill him, or was he still alive? And then when they left him out in the elements or buried him or whatever, did that kill him? Because
I think I don't know, because again, without any organs to test or any blood, you know, I mean,
Right.
it's hard. It's just bones. I can say that I think that the hitting his head is what killed him. I think the punch knocked him out, and then cracking the back of his head is what did him in.
oh, poor David.
Or David, and to his remaining family, man, I'm thankful for you guys.
Yeah, well, definitely check out the supplemental video. When Ed and I went up to Schuylkill Haven,
Definitely.
you'll see David's house. You'll see sort of where his bones were found as best
Mhm.
that we could get to.
Yep. And you'll see
you'll just-
Caldwell Street, like where all these
Yes.
little houses are. And we stopped by the cemetery too, and we found his plot. We walked around a little bit and we found him. So we paid our respects when we got there too, which was nice to do.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And that actually, just being there and seeing his grave marker made it all very real as well. Because you don't generally, I mean, you might see a picture on findagrave.com, but you don't generally, actually see it in person. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so next week, Rob, and then a new block.
Woohoo! We love a new block.
We do.
Well, if you have anything to say about this case, let us know. You can hit us up on our socials: Facebook, Insta, TikTok, Blue Sky, Reddit at Murder Unscripted. You can email us at murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com, or you can leave us a note through our website, www.murderunscriptedpod.com.
That's it.
Well, that is all we have for today, so thank you for listening, and tune in next week for the interview with Rob. But until then, be nice, stay hydrated,
Yes.
and remember, perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
No perverts in this case.
I don't know, Fred sounded like a perv.
Oh, yeah. Never mind. Total pervert. Don't touch animals.
And Kathy buying beer for 13-year-olds?
It was
Don't love
1985.
that.
I take it back. A lot of perverts in this case.
A lot of perverts.
See ya.
Bye.